Elijah Rice is with us today. Good afternoon or good morning. I don't know what time it is for you, but how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm doing pretty well. It's currently the morning, but
Oh,
I'll take a good afternoon whenever.
yeah, absolutely. Now, you've got a new book which is called What Makes and we can't say the next word, but I think we can say it ends in whole.
Mm,
So, how would you describe that book? I take it it's pretty self explanatory what it tells us.
yeah, so it's a comedy book.
Hmm.
I never really considered it a book that you start from beginning to end. It's more like
Yeah.
a guide or a dictionary of finding different categories and different subcategories of that kind of behavior and kind of just roasting those types of people.
Yeah, and that's kind of cool. I guess it's a book that you can just pick up and go to any page whenever you like.
Yeah, that was sort of the idea. I mean, part of me was like, well, I hope, people give this book to their friends that,
Yeah.
maybe need a little correction in their life. But
And where did you get all the ideas of what makes something whole? Because there's a lot of things you would have had to think about to fill up a whole book.
definitely, a lot of it was based on personal experience. A lot of just, I've always tried to be a very observant person and watch people. So sometimes I would just watch people and listen to them talk and do things.
Mm.
And I'm like, man, you're kind of not very nice. So then I
Yeah.
would take that and rework that behavior and just roast them.
Absolutely. And if somebody reads this book, maybe there's a point in it where they might realize, hang on, I think I'm this word.
Yeah, if I'm being totally honest, even some of my own behaviors in there, I think
Oh.
all of us, have that to a slight degree. So, that was sort of like we're all a little bit, but
Mm.
maybe if we all have a little self-reflection, we can improve ourselves a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And where did the idea for the whole book come from originally?
So is actually my friend that I used to hang out with. She would just call people out in public, and we would see people, doing something, or like the example is like, if you drive a jacked up truck, you might be, and I thought that was super funny. I thought there was enough there to like write a whole book.
Mm.
She didn't want to. I asked her if she wanted to co-write it with me and work on it together, but she said no, go for it, and that's sort of where it came from.
Yeah, that's true. Anybody that's got a big truck like that, and
Oh,
people say they're
absolutely.
compensating for something, don't they?
Oh, for sure. They definitely are.
Yeah. And in the UK, we have a sort of different variation on the word as well, which is
Mm-hmm.
interesting. We take away one of the S's and put an R and then an E, which is kind of weird. I don't know why that is.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think the difference in language between the two countries. I think I read somewhere that it has a lot to do with newspapers back
Oh.
in the day in the United States, that they dropped a lot of the letters that you guys use just
Hmm.
simply to save print space.
Hmm.
And so that just became how we all talk over here.
Ah, that's pretty cool, actually. That makes a lot of sense, actually. That there's an actual reasoning behind it other than they just decided to be different.
Right.
Yeah. And how long did this book actually take you to write?
So I started it when I was 18,
Wow.
and I took a big pause from it. It took me about 4 years total
Hmm.
to write it. And then I spent the next few years trying to get it
Yeah.
published, trying to get an agent, which just didn't really work.
Yeah. And is it easier to write a book that is just sort of a collection of different things rather than a novel? Because I guess there's no pressure on finishing a particular storyline or anything like that.
I would say it's a lot easier to write the kind of book that I've
Yeah.
written versus a novel. Like I've tried writing, I've written some short stories, I've started novels,
Hmm.
and it's just so much work that goes into it.
Yeah. And to write a comedy book, I guess would you say you're a particularly funny person?
I like to think myself as funny. Some
Yeah.
people might think I'm funny, some people don't. I guess I
Mm.
don't know.
Yeah. That's true. And did you get anybody to proofread it to make sure it was actually good and funny? Because I guess what's funny to one person isn't always to another.
When so my My fiance at the time, who is now my wife, actually edited the book and proofread it for me.
Yeah.
And she thought it was funny. And I had some friends and family look over it and they all said it was funny. So, here's hoping that people who don't know me also think it's funny.
Yeah, absolutely. And how has this pandemic affected it? Because I guess you started writing it, 7 years ago? So
something like that, yeah.
I guess, the pandemic time is only a small part of that, isn't it?
The pandemic didn't actually play into effect in this particular book at all because I've actually had it finished for years, just sort of sitting on it, trying to get somebody to be interested in it, which I think the title is kind of what turned a lot of agents and publishers off. And so I was like, well, I can self-publish it on Amazon and just sort of get it out there and be done with it and stop worrying about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's an interesting thing with Amazon because it seems to have opened up the world to a lot of authors that before would have really struggled to get their book out there. But now anyone can publish on Amazon, which is great.
It is great. I think that's sort of the beauty of the world that we live in now with the internet is like it feels like a lot more people have a lot more opportunity to get their work out there.
Yeah. Have you used any examples in the book of real life people that we all know, like, I don't know, former presidents or just famous people in general?
No, I tried not to use any real life, like personal to me. These are all like, it's all based on people I interacted with, but no famous people are inspirations. I actually had written the book prior to any former presidents, but had I been writing it at the time, I'm sure there would have been a lot more inspiration.
Yeah. So you wrote this book before any former president. So that must have been 17?
Yeah, I started writing it in 1773 and it took me a few years to get it done.
Yeah, absolutely. And it must be quite fun to write a book about this topic as opposed to a drama or something. I don't know, I guess.
It felt really good because like you hold all these things inside you, like people say they rub you the wrong way, that you don't like their behavior, and you just like you can type it in a super safe, super like just kind of like I'm gonna get at this person, and I have the time to find all the right words.
Yes. And do you have any more examples then of what you think makes an word?
Oh, sure. I mean, in the book itself, I cover a wide variety of topics. I go from fashion, I talk about some politics and religion, romance, dining out, internet behavior, just all kinds of topics I get into.
And come on, I can take it. Is there anything you're noticing about me that you would put in the book?
So far, you seem pretty normal. It's hard to, see based on the screen or anything, but I haven't noticed anything quite yet.
Yeah. I'm just noticing, is that a lot of wood you've got in the background?
It is. So I have a wood stove, and that's the only source of heat in the house currently. So we got to have a lot of wood.
Yeah. And it's that time of year where it gets cold again. So you need
it's getting quite cold.
Yeah, I know it's cold because I'm wearing a jumper, which doesn't always happen, but it's that time of year.
Yeah, for sure. Like the other day, like it got below 20 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow. Yeah. And where do you actually get that wood? Do you chop it down, or is there a wood shop somewhere?
You can order it. Like when my parents first got a wood stove where so this is actually my parents' old house that we bought, just for clarification.
Yeah.
When we first started doing it, we had to hand chop it all ourselves, which was terrible. So now we just order it.
Yeah. Well, that's so much easier, isn't it?
Oh, so much easier.
Yeah. And have you thought about making the book out of that wood?
No. Can't say that I have. I think, I don't really have the ability to make paper in my house.
Yeah. To be honest, I'm still not even sure how you make paper out of trees. Never figured it out.
I think they basically like shave it down into almost like sawdust, and then I think they like press it back together. I could be talking out of nowhere, but I have no idea.
Yeah, it's a bit suspicious. And is there anything you put in the book and then you thought, actually, that's a bit too harsh, I'm going to cut it out?
Yes. So I had to rewrite both the religious and politics sections a few
Yeah.
times because those are both things I personally feel very strongly about.
Mm.
And there, I wrote like several different ones. And then I reread it and I was like, this isn't funny. I'm just
Mm.
ranting and being like
Yeah.
too serious in a comedy book. So I had to rewrite it to try to make it actually funny.
Yeah, and I guess politics and religion is something that, although it's a comedy book, people could be offended by it, I suppose, so it's a bit risky when you're writing comedy about that.
Yeah, it's that's definitely something that's occurred to me
Hmm.
is that I could offend people with
Yeah.
that, and I came to realize that I don't care if I do or
Hmm.
not. These are my
Yeah.
words, these are my thoughts. If you're offended and
Yeah.
your first response is just like, "Oh, I'm upset,"
Hmm.
then
Yeah.
that's on you.
Yeah. And if you're an easily offended person, I don't know why you would buy a book with that name.
That's a good point. Maybe just so that you can continue to be offended by something.
Yeah, I suppose there do seem to be people that are looking to be offended by anything, so they'd
Mhm.
go straight for that book probably.
I mean, in my head, like when you daydream about these things, I'm like, if somebody like picked it up and did get offended by it and created like an outrage mob, it'd actually probably be really good for my book because then more
Yeah.
people would see
Yeah,
it.
it's like
So
there's no such thing as bad publicity.
exactly.
Yeah. And were there any parts of the book that you struggled with and thought would never get done, I suppose?
There were a lot of ideas I had that were sort of you couldn't categorize in any of the very specific categories that I'd already come up with.
Yeah.
So it took me a bit to figure out like, oh, where can I put this one? And then at the end, I
Yeah.
just sort of created like general behavior
Mm.
as a category. So
Yeah. Mm. And is it difficult to know when it's finished when you're doing a book that isn't a novel with a beginning, middle, and end? Because you just have to decide one day, right, I've done all I can do and it's long enough.
yeah, it was because in theory, this is a book that you could write forever because there's
Yeah.
always going to be more examples and people that
Mm.
you meet. So, but there came a point where I was like, I've worked on this for this long. I feel like this book is done.
Yeah.
I could write more, but I feel like I've said all I need to say for this particular book.
Yeah, and I suppose could there be a sequel on the way if you notice loads more things that you could have put in the book?
Definitely. If this book does have any sort of traction to it and people like it, I could definitely write more volumes of it.
Yeah, and even not a direct sequel, but maybe what makes something else. I don't know, what makes a nice person, what makes maybe another negative word, I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely had some thoughts about, writing some other like similarly like titled
Yeah.
things, but as of now, I haven't really thought of a good enough idea to carry that out.
Yeah. And what would you say is your favorite part of writing the book?
Honestly, it was when I first started writing it and the ideas were just flowing, like based on people I've met. It just felt really cathartic to just write this. It's almost like a daydream fantasy. Like when
Yeah.
you think about something, you're like, oh, I wish I had said this. Like this was an opportunity to actually say the things that you wish you had said.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of the way the book actually looks, I suppose, are there pictures and colours and stuff?
So it is black and white. There are
Mm.
pictures with a caricature of the character who we have nicknamed the angry a-hole. Uh, and are you familiar with the Fallout franchise at all?
I've heard of it, but I don't really know what it is, I don't think.
So it's a large part of it's based on like 1950s America. So we
Ah.
took a lot of that sort of like idea of like pictures that depict a lot of cool things and like,
Mm.
but they're think like Monopoly,
Yeah.
like those the sort of cards. They're a quick, easy, simple picture that sort of describes what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of cool then. And in the not too distant future, have you got any other books that are sort of unrelated to this one?
Yeah, so I'm writing a book. So I currently work in the food industry. I've worked in kitchens
Ooh.
my entire professional career. So I'm actually writing a book of haikus that are
Ooh.
specifically based around working in professional kitchens.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. Maybe you should come on the show again one day to cook something for us. That'd be fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And does that fire with the wood help with cooking? cooking at all?
In theory, if we lost power, I could cook on it, but
Yeah.
we did try that once and it really didn't work great.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Maybe marshmallows, that could be okay, but anything
yeah, you could
else?
definitely do it in there, but I
Yeah.
wouldn't like want to cook a roast on there or anything.
No. And it's kind of interesting that you just decided to call the character the angry because you didn't base it on a particular name, because I suppose that would be a bit risky because somebody with that name might think it's them.
Right, exactly. And there are certainly people who, I could have named it after. We don't need to
Yeah.
name specifics, but there definitely are people who could have fit the name.
Yeah. I wonder, sometimes people just say, anyone with this name is that. So maybe people would expect a name like that.
Yeah, certainly there are certain names like I think Kyle is definitely a name that has a reputation to it. Obviously, Karen in our modern.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So things like that, I think definitely.
Yeah. And do you think that being this word or having a big ego or whatever would help a writer at all?
I think, yes, I think those sort of behaviors tend to, because you're not as afraid of hurting people. You're not as afraid of stepping on people and like having that killer instinct to get you ahead.
Yeah.
I think that helps you for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. And how did you get into writing yourself then?
That's funny because I'm actually really not much of a reader. I don't read a lot. I mostly focused a lot of my early stuff on video and YouTube creation.
Yeah.
But this felt like it sort of needed to be a book. It didn't feel like long form could be a video series or whatever. I felt like a concise package would be the best way to do it. So putting this in writing was the best option.
Yeah, and it's interesting because if you don't read much, do you know what makes a good book? I guess it's hard to tell, isn't it?
I mean, yeah, you never know. Like, obviously I've read some books. It's not like I've never read in my life.
Yeah.
But I also mostly read fiction, and so this is nonfiction. So I felt like mostly just writing it how I talk, how I feel about things would be the best way to go about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And who would you say have been some of your favourite authors, even if it's only a few?
Well, Sherlock Holmes has always been my favorite series, so probably Sir Arthur Conan Doyle would be my favorite author. Stephen King is another person I really like their books. Another Maine native. I mean, maybe I'm biased, maybe I'm not. Who knows?
Yeah, well, it's good to have that hometown pride.
Exactly.
And when you're not writing these books, I suppose you've already mentioned a few things you like to do with cooking and things, but what else are you getting up to when you're not working and things?
These days, like a lot of video games, a lot of, working on the house, a lot of just watching movies and YouTube and stuff like that. I lead a pretty boring life, honestly.
Yeah. Well, I think you mentioned that the house is a bit of a fixer-upper, so are you
It is
building and refurbishing it?
Yeah, we just had the roof redone, which is very exciting. And next year, I'm hoping to get the back of the house finished completely, and then we'll start working on the interior. It's like mostly good. It needs just a lot of like TLC and cosmetics.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's good to have the roof done for winter as well.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Well, where are we able to check out the book if we'd like to read it in places?
Amazon is currently the only place it's available. You can find it by typing in the title of the book. And then I would, since it's brand new, put the search in as paperback, and then it should come up. Or you can type my name in, and it might come up as well.
Yeah, is it just paperback, or is it on Kindle as well? Or
so it's not on Kindle because I didn't format it properly to be on Kindle. So it probably never will be because I would have to basically re-edit the entire book, and I don't really want to do that.
That's weird. I never knew that because I'd have just thought they just take a copy of the book and put it on, but it's more complicated, is it?
It is. A little bit.
Interesting. Well, thanks very much for coming on the show today. It's been great talking to you.
You as well. Thank you very much for having me.